And our first lecture is called Healing the Mind. Some authors claim that all disease begins in the mind. I don't quite believe that, but I do know with some people the mind plays a major role, and with some people the mind plays a minor role. Everything that happens in the body affects the mind, and everything that happens in the mind affects the body. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to go inside the brain and look at how the basic functions on the way we think happens. So in the front part of the brain, it's called the prefrontal cortex. Pre meaning it's at the front. Frontal, again, it's at the front. Cortex. And cortex is a name given to the whole top of the brain. So with the prefrontal cortex, it's just this front third of the brain. And this is where our intellect is. This is where our reasoning powers reside. This is where judgment takes place. And this is where I call the most wonderful gift that I believe God gave to mankind. It is the will. And when you think about it, our decisions determine our destiny. And when you have a look at the functions of the prefrontal cortex, you can see that every decision we make, God designed that we make according to intellect, reason, and judgment. Unfortunately today, there are many things people are doing that are causing a compromise of the prefrontal cortex. So this is where we make our decisions. And I used a verse earlier in the week, it's found in 2 Timothy 1 verse 7, where God says, I've not given you the spirit of fear, but of power. We looked at how knowledge is power, of love, and a sound mind. What's a sound mind? I'd like to suggest that a well-functioning prefrontal cortex, where our intellect, our reasoning powers, and our judgment is working well, enabling us to make proper decisions, isn't that a sound mind? And because our decisions determine our destiny, we have to be very careful on our decisions. We don't choose what happens to us. No way do we choose what happens to us. But we choose our destiny by the way we respond or react to what happens to us. Now, it sounds very black and white, but it actually isn't. Something else comes into the equation, and that is our limbic system. And our limbic system is often called our e-brain or our emotional brain. They're our emotions. And God designed that our emotions, our thoughts, our feelings thread through the prefrontal cortex. I thank God every day that the devil can't read our mind. Don't you love that? And no one can read our minds. Only God can read our minds. Do you know what that means? When it comes into your mind, you have the choice. Are you going to utter it? Are you going to live it? Or are you going to say, no? I thank God every day for that. And that's why I call the front part of the brain our board of senses. Our board of senses, or our board of critiques, and our emotions, our thoughts, our feelings go through, and that's where the final decision is made. And it is the prefrontal cortex where God communicates with mankind. You see, God is not in every man. You would never say God was in Hitler, Mugabe, Stalin. No. God gave mankind choice. And because God gave mankind choice, what a gamble. Because what that would mean is that some choose wrong. And when a person chooses wrong, innocent people suffer. It's the nature of the beast. And I was talking with a couple in our retreat one day, and the man said, well, if I was the guy up top, I'd come with a machine gun and I'd mow them all down. And his wife laughed and said, and what good would that do? Then the next crop would come up. And as an Australian, we know our history very keenly of Gallipoli, how in the trenches, those young men, the trumpet blasted and they jumped up and they were just mowed down. And then the trumpet blasted again and the next lot come out. I had My grandmother lost 3 brothers in that war. Yeah. And that is an illustration of that. No, that's not going to fix the problem. You see, God gave mankind choice. He made us free moral agents. He didn't want robots. And when someone loves you, you want them to love you because they choose to love you, not because they must. There is a name for forced love, and that is rape. There's no love at all in that. No, God gave mankind choice. And you can see that he gave mankind choice, and the way he made the brain is that we make the choice according to intellect, reason, and judgment. My husband, Michael, he was an altar boy in the Catholic Church, and he was going to become a priest. And he went to a weekend for all the boys, he was 14, that wanted to become priests. The priests were drunk. Michael had a lot of questions. They laughed at him, and what he saw that weekend, he came away saying, "There is no God." And he went wild. He became a wild bikie. Hair was long. He was in a bike club. He'd just gone through the test to become a member. He'd been beaten to a pulp, and then he drove through a stop sign at 100 miles an hour. They were the 2 initiations into the bike club. Anyway, survived them both. And then a young man came and worked where he was working, and this young man was a Christian. Michael hated Christians. He was now an atheist. So whenever he met a Christian, he just threw the book at him. "How can you say there is a God when he makes people burn forever?" And this young man said, "No, he doesn't." Michael said, "Of course he does. I'm a Catholic, I know." And this young man said, "Well, show me." Well, Michael didn't know because he'd never really read the Bible. And so everything this young man said, he would go to the library that night. Michael would go to the library, check it out. And the more he checked it out, the more he found that this young man, what he said was true. And the young man said to him, "I can show you more. I can come to your house and give you a Bible study." Michael said, "All right." This was Friday. All weekend, Michael thought, "Oh, I don't want him coming to my house." So he thought, Monday I'm going to find him, and said, "Don't you dare come to my house." But he couldn't find him. And later on, he found out that God spoke to the young man and said, "Hide yourself." Monday night comes, this young man comes into Michael's house, which is painted black inside and out. There are Harley Davidsons all through the lounge room, drugs all over the coffee table. Came in with his nice pants and shirt with his Bible under his arm and 2 more Bibles for Michael and his friend. And he sat down and he went through Daniel chapter 2. And he showed these 2 young men Daniel chapter 2. And in Daniel chapter 2, the king has a dream. And when he wakes up in the morning, King Nebuchadnezzar, he can't remember the dream. He's the king of Babylon. So he gets all the wise men and he says, "Show me the dream and show me the interpretation." And they said, "Show us the dream and we'll give you the interpretation." He said, "Show me the dream and the interpretation, or you're all dead by morning." Now Daniel, who was a captive from Jerusalem, he was considered a wise man. So he got the message, "We're all dying in the morning." And he said, "Why?" Because the king's had a dream. So that night, Daniel prayed and said, "Father in heaven, show me the dream." And God showed him the dream and the interpretation. So just before they were all about to be killed, Daniel goes into the king and says, "God has shown me the dream." He said, "The dream was, you dreamed of a statue, head of gold, breast of silver, hips of bronze, legs of iron, feet of iron and clay." And the king said, "That's what I dreamt." And Daniel said, "And God showed me the interpretation. You are that head of gold. After you will come the Medes and Persians." They use a lot of silver. "After you will become the Greeks." They used a lot of brass. "After that will come the Romans." They used a lot of iron. And then the iron and clay are how we see Europe today. Strong countries, weaker countries. And then a stone hits the feet, and that's the second coming of Jesus. Michael couldn't believe his ears. He said, this must have been written after. Well, it really couldn't have been written after because we still haven't finished. So he went to the library and he discovered that the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in 1946, which perfectly supported it. The more Michael tried to disprove this young man, the more he proved him right. This young man was able to answer all his questions. So Michael said, all right, I'm going to give it 6 months. I'm going to become a Christian, but I'm only going to give it 6 months. Do you know, a week later, Michael's in bed. In the next room, his friend's in the next bed, and they're talking. Unbeknownst to them, there's police outside about to raid their house. And this is what the police are hearing. Michael and his friend. Michael says, I'm going to continue my Bible studies. What are you going to do? I'm going to go to Bible school. Oh, yeah, I'm going to go to Bible school and become a pastor. This is what the police are listening to. Police are looking at each other. Anyway, they charge in to do the raid. Michael and his friend jump up and they say, you won't find any drugs. And the police say, as if. They pull the place apart. They don't find any drugs. So they come back to Michael. They look at him and Michael says, no, we're clean. We've become Christians. The police looked at each other, raised their eyebrows. Each policeman shook their hands, went out scratching their heads. Michael says it's the best decision he ever made. He was 21, he's now 67. He was going to try it for 6 months. It was the best thing he ever tried. You see, it's a choice. And that's what God gives us, choice. But he designs our choices to be made according to intellect, reason and judgment. And the more Michael searched, the more it made sense. It made more sense than anything he'd ever looked at. You see, it is here where God communicates with man. In Isaiah 1:18, the Bible says, come, let us reason together. It is right there. But what often holds us back is our emotions. And the front part of the brain, in the right side, so I'm looking at your right, this is the I won't decision. And on the left side of the prefrontal cortex is the I will decision. And right in the middle is the I want. I want meaning, what do you want out of life? What are your goals? Where are you going? So let me give you a quick illustration of what we all experience, I think, as soon as we wake up. As soon as we wake up in the morning, our emotions, the first emotion is usually, oh, it's so nice in bed. I'll just stay a minute longer. I won't get up yet. I will stay. But as our reason, intellect and judgment starts to dawn, we start to consider the day. The highest function of the prefrontal cortex is foresight, looking ahead and assessing the result of what we're doing right now. We start to think about our day. We've got a busy day. Got quite a few appointments today. I need to get up. I need to exercise. I need to drink water. I need to have a good breakfast, because of what I want out of this day. That's foresight. Now, this prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until the age of 30. Looking historically, Jesus began his ministry at the age of 30. Young men traditionally weren't given of positions of responsibility until the age of 30. And when all my children, one by one, reached 30, I shook their hands. I said, congratulations, your prefrontal cortex is now fully developed. They said, yeah, Mum. I remember Peter did something silly when he was 25. I said, Peter, what are you doing? He said, Mum, my prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed. I said, that's why you need your mother. And that's why I say to adults, bind your children to your heart when they're young, so that they will make you their counsellor and guide, because they need someone with a fully developed prefrontal cortex. Oh, what an honour it was last week to have my 20-year-old granddaughter ring me and say, Nana, can I talk to you about relationships? Oh, what an honour. Do you know, many adults drive the young people away. You shouldn't be doing this, you should be doing this. You never nag, because it never does any good. Did it do us any good? I know personally that the more I was pushed, the more I went the other way. When I was 16, I was to be bridesmaid for my cousin, and her mother and my mother, who were sisters, were talking about all these fancy hairdos they wanted me to have. So I went out and I cut my hair off, so it was half an inch all over. That was me. I remember. I remember. And so I never lowered my standard, but I made sure that I spent time with my children, time with my adolescents, time with my teenagers. And it says in James chapter 1, verse 19, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. My father used to say, you got 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them in that proportion. Our children went out to work at a young age, 15, 16. They went into apprenticeships, they were homeschooled, so went out a bit earlier. They come home every weekend and I go for walks with them and let them talk, and sometimes some of the things they said made my hair stand on end, and God was giving me the strong impression, keep your mouth closed and listen. Because if I say, what do they now do? They close up. And who do you want them to talk to? You want them to talk to you. In fact, when we had a lot of teenagers, we used to, every Saturday afternoon, we'd go mountain climbing. Sometimes we'd have 6 carloads of teenagers, and Michael and I climbing up the mountains. That's why you've got to keep fit. And we'd all roll back into the house in the late afternoon, and they're all worn out. That's what we want. And we let them all stay the night, and we'd get extra blankets and, where do you want them? You want them with you. Yep. Because a lot of parents, they want the house just nice. They don't want those teenagers in their house. These are such important times. It's not forever. The day comes when they're all gone. People used to say to me, what are you going to do when they go, Barbara? I say, you want to see my list? Love it when they're there, love it when they go. And this is where you bind them to your heart and time. It's just doing things with them. That's why we climbed mountains. That's why when my son married a lady that had a little 3-year-old, I bought a scooter. And I started scooting everywhere with him and bind him to my heart. And then his mother wanted something from the shop, so we'd go into the shop and the little boy would say, I want that candy and that candy and that candy. And I squatted down, eye to eye contact. This grandma doesn't do that. See the smile? You know what the smile says? I love you. Let's buy apples and go home and make an apple pie. And he'd smile because I'm smiling. And he'd nod and we'd leave. And he didn't get anything. So we go home and we make an apple pie together. Do you know, that's what they love and that's what they remember. Yes, it takes time. And it's important to do an assessment of your time, because time is something that we can't make up for that lost time. It says in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. Time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up that which was planted. It's important to value your time, because the prince on his throne and the pauper in the street, we all have the same time. And it's a priceless treasure. And many people lose that precious time because they go to bed too late and they get up too late. And I think it's 9:30 tomorrow morning. I'm going to be talking about all the amazing processes that happen in our brain while we sleep and how much sleep we need. And so what What compromises that prefrontal cortex? And you might be surprised at what I'm going to say, and you might not be surprised. It sustained me. Sunshine, the ultraviolet rays from the sun go through neurochemical pathways, hit the pineal gland, and cause a release of serotonin, that's your mood hormone, cause a release of melatonin, that helps you sleep better at night, causes a release of epithalamin, that increases learning capacity, all because our eyes are getting sunshine. Your brain needs sunshine and it gets it through the eyes. I don't suggest we look at the sun, but just being outside, through a sunny day, you're getting those ultraviolet rays going into your eyes. Use of water. This brain is a hydroelectric system. No hydro, no electricity. A person can develop negative thought patterns in a dehydrated brain. That's a little bit scary. Start early. Do you take your water to bed with you? As soon as you wake up, start drinking. Little by little by little, all through the day. Our brain needs water. And there's no reserve tank on the back. The only water that goes in is the water that we drink. Sleep. Dr. Matthew Walker, he shows that 10 nights of 6 hours sleep a night, 50% less cognitive performance, 50% less physical performance. 6 hours. Most people think 6 hours is pretty good. And when he'd finished writing the book, finished his study before he wrote the book, he was very disappointed with the conclusions. Why was he disappointed? He was hoping that the research would show, yes, 6 hours is pretty good. It doesn't. 8. It must be 8 for all the processes that happen in the night to be fulfilled. And tomorrow morning I'll show you how you can train your body back into that. Notice what I said. He was disappointed with the results. You see, 6 hours you feel okay. It's a deception. It's actually not okay. The next one is trust. Trust in God. Anxiety, discontent, remorse, guilt, distrust, all tends to break down the life forces and invite decay and death into the body. What are guilt, distrust, remorse? What are they? They are actually feelings. They are emotions. And we can accept those emotions or we can reject them. And one thing that frees us from these is the ability to forgive. Peter went up to Jesus and said, should we forgive 7 times? Peter thought that's pretty generous. Jesus said 70 times 7. What's that? 400 and... Anyway, a lot of times. In other words, we should never stop forgiving. Most people don't realise that forgiveness is a prefrontal cortex decision. It's not an emotion, it's not a feeling, because our feelings will tell us they don't deserve it. And that may be true, but it's got nothing to do with it. Use of forgiveness is the only prescription in the entire universe that has the power to break the chemical bonds of hostility, anger, and hate. So in the book, The Ministry of Healing, in the chapter Mind Cure, where the author says grief, anxiety, discontent, remorse, guilt, distrust, all tend to break down the life forces and invite decay and death into the body, what does that mean? Well, Dr. Carolyn Leaf, who's a Christian psychoanalyst, she's written some recent books called Who Switched Off My Brain? She says the same thing, and she says it because research is proving today that when we entertain or cherish negativity, thorns grow. Physical thorns grow between the dendrites, and these physical thorns have the ability to damage the tissues. There's your psychosomatic diseases. So when a negative thought comes into the brain, she says it's like a breeze wafting through the branches of the trees. And at that point we have a choice. We can hold on to that negative thought or we can let it go. You see, things come and go all through our life. And we only become a victim to the negative experiences when we continue to dwell on them. That's when we hold on to them, and that's when the thorns grow. God's government is a government of freedom. Freedom's based on free choice. And we have a choice. We can hold on to it or we can let it go. And in Philippians 3:15, the Bible says, "This one thing I can do, forgetting the things which are behind, I reach forth to the things which are before. I press towards the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus." What's the high calling of God? You'll find it in John 10:10. Jesus said, "I have come that they might have life, and that they might have life more abundantly." Life should be good. And if it is not good, we have to put the detective hat on and find out, why isn't it good? Well, I was abused 20 years ago. Well, leave it there. Leave it there. But the person that did that to me, forgive them. But they don't deserve to be forgiven. That's right. I agree, but it's got nothing to do with it. Because whether you forgive or not, they will never know. The only person that is affected by your forgiveness is yourself. Forgiveness cuts the chains that bind you to that painful past. Forgiveness gives you wings, gives you freedom, and it allows you to forget the things which are behind and reach forward. Dr. Carolyn Leaf shows that when we make the decision to forgive, because it's a prefrontal cortex decision, easy to make when that prefrontal cortex is well hydrated, well sunned, well slept, well nourished. When we make that decision, something happens. But this will only happen if we go to bed early, because it's the hours before midnight where the vacuum cleaner system of the brain, it's called the glymphatic system. And the glymphatic system is made up of glial cells, and the glymphatic system is the vacuum cleaner of the brain. Two things have to be present. We make the decision, the mental decision, I will forgive. Then we go to bed before midnight, and when those things are present, when those two things are present while we sleep, the glymphatic system comes along and vacuum cleans up all the thorns. What an amazing process. Look what science shows us today. Science shows us today that this decision to forgive doesn't want to rub them out, and we want them rubbed out. That decision, I'll keep my finger there we go. That decision to forgive has a physiological effect in the brain to vacuum clean up all the thorns. Science is now showing us that forgiveness has a physiological effect in the brain, but two things must be present. The decision to forgive and going to bed early where the glymphatic system is the most active. I've seen it again and again and again. A young girl who used to attend our program regularly, visit us every year, so much so she called me Mum and Michael Dad. She was slightly disabled. And she used to constantly tell the story about how her stepfather had abused her. Her stepfather had abused her. The story was being told again and again and again. So one day I sat with her and I said, Jazzy, I want you to tell me the story. She looked down. I said, tell me what happened. She said, well, my little stepbrother was on the floor convulsing with a fever. And her stepfather was over him, and she walked in at the age of 15 and said, I'll handle this. I've done a first aid course. So we actually probably know the reaction of that man. He said, get out of here. And she got highly offended and left. That was the abuse that she talked about. I said, aha. I said, Jazzy, can you understand that that man was very upset? He was very upset. His little one was convulsing, and yes, you've done a first aid kiss, but he knows what to do too, and he want to handle this by himself. I said, have you forgiven him? Oh dear, she did not like that. She looked away. She got up and she left the room. The next day when I saw her, she went. She didn't want to come near me, didn't want to talk to me. So the next day I said, hi Jazzy. I went up, I said, Jazzy, have you forgiven? I said, you know, it'll only take a minute and it's going to help you, it's going to free you. I could see her still resisting. Body language tells a lot. I said, do you pray every day? She said, yes, Mum, I do. I said, do you pray, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive them that trespass against us? Oh, she said, yes, yes. I said, you know what you're doing? You're saying, God, forgive me the way I'm forgiving my stepfather. She looked at me with shock. And she left. The next day when she came in, she had a big smile on her face. I knew straight away what she'd done. I said, hi, Jazzy. She said, hi, Mum. I said, Jazzy, have you done it? She said, I have. She was totally freed. She never related that story again. And yet for 10 years, she'd been relating it every day, every day, every day. And that's why I sat with her and said, Jazzy, what's this about? We're going to do something about this. Because the fact is that every day when she told the story, what's happening to the story? It's actually getting bigger and bigger. The pathway's getting bigger. These are pathways in our brain. They're like pathways in the bush. I think you have snow seasons where there's skiing. I'm sure there's ski pathways. And it's so easy to go down those pathways. We're creatures that love going down the path of least resistance. Isn't that true? And she would just slip into that pathway every day, and every day the thorns would grow. And so I knew, out of my love for this young woman, that we had to get to the bottom of this. We had to talk about some uncomfortable issues to be able to free it. You know, when you're weeding the garden, you know, it's not a pleasant thing to do, getting down, fingers in the dirt, weeding the garden, but I love weeding the garden because I love a weed-free garden. It's a process. But what happened with Jasmine is she made another pathway. It was her forgiveness pathway. And every day she confirmed the fact that she had forgiven. And so every day she went down the new pathway and didn't go down the old pathway. And so the new pathway got bigger and bigger and bigger. And it is now 10 years later, and I've never heard her relate the story. She was freed. How long does it take before the new pathway is stronger than the old? 21 days. That's what the researcher says. 21 days of going down the new pathway and 21 days of not going down the old pathway, you got a bigger pathway. 60 days, it says, before it's in cement. Now, we heard some incredible music tonight, violin, piano. There was another instrument. I was out the back. I'm not sure quite what it was. I'm sure that violinist didn't start playing that violin yesterday. Is that right? And it's the same process. Even musicians, when they learn a new piece, they've got to go over it and over it. And maybe after 21 days, they've got it fairly good. But after 60 days, they can do what I saw my husband's daughter at the age of 14. She was a clever pianist. She's playing Fair Release while she's chatting to her girlfriends. Not even looking at her fingers, not making a mistake. It's in cement. It's the same process of learning anything new. And the research is showing today that there are 3 things that are the most potent in actually causing new dendrites. Every time you learn something new, you grow another dendrite. another dendrite, another dendrite. And this one nerve cell, and we have 1 trillion in our brain, it has the potential to develop 70,000 dendrites. That's one dendrite, and we have 1 trillion. Oh, the capacity of our brain. Oh, the tragedy that most people go through their whole lives, never fully accessing the full potential of our brain. You know the old saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. They've proved it to be wrong. You can. It's as simple as this. If you say you can, you will. And if you say you can't, you're right. You won't. We should be learning new things till the day we die. What the research is showing today is that we can rewire our brain right up until the day we die. And that's what Jasmine did. She rewired her brain. So our brain can change. If that brain cell's dead, it cannot regrow. But the research is showing since 1998 that given the right conditions, new brain cells can develop. And there are 3 shockers that shock the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is the protein that causes a release of new brain cells. What are the 3 shockers? Ending every hot shower with a quick cold. Have you tried it? Tomorrow afternoon we're going to look at our immune system and you'll see that that's the biggest booster. So maybe by the day after tomorrow you'll be doing it. But it causes a release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which stimulates neurogenesis. That's new brain cells. Number 2, the second thing that causes a release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, new brain cells, is fasting. So maybe have a day fast a week, or maybe 2 days fast a fortnight, or I don't know if you say fortnight, 2 weeks, or maybe 2 days a month, or time-restricted eating. Eating breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, and supper like a pauper. Yesterday I had breakfast like a lunch, breakfast like a king. I had lunch like a queen, and I didn't eat again till breakfast the next day. So I had an 18-hour fast. That causes a release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So second one is fasting. The third one is the high-intensity interval training. When you're running for your life, that's a shocker. And that shocker causes a release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor. That's new brain cells. But I want to come back to the 3 things that are the most effective at causing new nerve cells. Yes, learning a musical instrument. Can you play a musical instrument? It's time to learn. Learning a new language. The house I had lunch in today, they always speak to their children in Romanian, so their children speak fluent Romanian and fluent English. What a gift to give an extra language. My son married a Finnish girl, and she speaks to her children only in Finnish, so his children speak fluent Finnish. He doesn't quite always know what they're saying. But what a gift to have another language. What's the third one? The third one is memorising Bible. There's a little book called Steps to Christ, and I think it's out there. And I read this on page 90. There is nothing more calculated to strengthen the intellect than the study of the Scriptures. There is no other book so potent to elevate the thoughts, vitalise the faculties, than the broad, ennobling truths of the Bible. If God's word were studied as it should be, men would have a breadth of the mind, a nobility of character, a stability of purpose rarely seen today. You can see why I had to memorise those 3. Do you know, I didn't read them and know them. I had to go over and over and over, about 21 days. And as you can see, now I got to 60 and it's in cement, so I cannot say it for a month and then say it, because those pathways are solid in my brain. Every time we learn something new, we learn another dendrite. We develop another dendrite. My husband, 15 years ago, went to learn to fly a helicopter. And his teacher said, I'm warning you, you're in your 50s. It's going to take a while. He said, I have got two students, both in their 50s. One's up to 60 hours, one's up to 40 hours. They still can't get the hovering. Michael said hovering is like trying to stay on a slippery rubber ball. It's very hard to hover. In fact, when they start to learn, the teacher's constantly grabbing the controls. Michael managed it in 20 hours. That's about the same amount of time that a 15-year-old will master hovering. Why did Michael master it? Well, there aren't many 50-year-olds that go to bed early, that drink 8 glasses of water a day, that don't do coffee, that don't do alcohol, that don't smoke cigarettes, that don't do any drugs, that eat a nourishing diet, that exercise every day, that have sunshine every day. Those sustain me principles will sustain us. I found a verse in the Bible for it. It's Psalm 55:22. Cast your burden upon the Lord and he shall sustain thee. He will never suffer the righteous to be moved. So Michael mastered it in 20 hours. He's got the same brain as us all. He was a bikie for a while. He partook of many drugs. But I'd like to suggest that he's been getting the brain-derived neurotrophic factor because he mastered hovering in 20 hours. The teacher couldn't believe it. I don't think the teacher will be flying helicopters much longer because he's such an alcoholic. And unfortunately, alcohol kills those brain cells. Do you know, it's such a gift that God has given us, this incredible brain. And it's really our responsibility to keep it. And when we keep it, when we look after it, it looks after us. But I'm going to give you a funny story to show you what happened with my husband. In 2020, it was against the law to hold a protest in Australia. So Michael held a protest every 2 weeks. Is it our right? It is our right. And the Bible says we ought to obey God rather than man. And Michael was protesting against the lockdowns, protesting about the mandates. Do you know, whenever a government comes with a mandate, that's not from God, because God's government is a government of freedom. So Michael went to speak in the protest. There were about 600 people, about 300 police. And the police saw that he was about to stand up and speak. So they came up and said, "Sir, if you speak, we'll arrest you." And Michael looked at them and said, "That'll be interesting." And he stood up and he began to speak. And they came up and they said, "Sir, stop." Michael said, "I haven't finished yet." Do you know the Bible says in Colossians 4:6, "Let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer every man." I'd like to suggest at the age of 21, when Michael surrendered his prefrontal cortex to God, he allowed God to work in his life. And he was a man that was not prone to anger. And so they jumped on him and they started walking away with him. But he noticed that they weren't holding him very tightly. He told me that he decided to have a bit of fun. And he jumped ahead of them and went and ran. He ran. And he didn't run out of the stadium, he ran in and out the crowd. And the police couldn't catch him. Michael has white hair. He looks like an elderly gentleman, but what they don't realise is Michael and I run up and down hills every day. We do the high intensity interval training. They could not catch him. You know, they've got all this stuff on their belts. And Michael was just running in and out of the crowd. The crowd are cheering, whistling, taking video clips. And Michael thought, oh, better let them catch me. So he slowed down and they jumped on him. And one young policeman was pulling his hand back, and Michael said, "Stop pulling my hand back, you're hurting me. Don't be so disrespectful to an elderly gentleman." And the policeman said, "You shouldn't have run." Michael said, "It's my right." And isn't that true? It's our right. Anyway, they let him walk over, being very tight. They decided not to arrest him. They probably thought, we don't want this bloke in our jails. And they took him to a table where there was a policeman who was taking his particulars. And as he's standing there giving the policeman his name, his address, etc., etc., a guy came up beside him, and this guy was big, tattoos all over him, big beard, and he said to Michael, "Are they hurting you?" Michael said, "I'm okay." And then he said to the policeman, "You hurt him, you answer to us." And he looked at Michael and said, "We're just over there." Michael looked over there, and there were all these bikers. Big, a lot of them Samoan. God's angels, maybe. That night, it was on the nightly news that the police could not catch this grey-haired gentleman. I think it turned out to be an embarrassment for the police, because 2 weeks later, Michael dutifully held his next protest in Sydney. There were hardly any police, and they all stood back. No one stopped them speaking. Do you know, sometimes it's not hard to stand out. But when we have a look at times past, and I love the poem of Rudyard Kipling, he said, "All we have of freedom, all we use and know, this our fathers bought for us long and long ago. Long forgotten bondage, dwarfing hearts and minds, this our fathers died to loose, shall be bound again." And so whenever we see these wrongs done to society, we are very thankful for men like my husband who make stands. Evil prospers when good men do nothing. I like to think that they couldn't shut the world down again. I hope not. I hope not. I hope that if they try to do that again, that we will stand. But my illustration was more to show that no matter what our age, we can be fit, we can be strong, and we can be enjoying life. Michael is the head of a political party in Australia. It's called HEART, Health, Environment, Accountability, Rights and Transparency. And isn't that what God wants us to stand for? But it's very important that we keep our prefrontal cortex strong by getting sunshine every day, by drinking adequate water, by going to bed early, by trusting in God. Because the Bible says that He is able. In Ephesians 3 verse 20 it says, "Now unto Him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us." Abstain from anything that would interfere with prefrontal cortex function. They're all the stimulants. That's the caffeine. That's the alcohol. That's the refined sugar. That's, even as we've looked at this week, a high wheat diet. Stop anything that would interfere with the proper functioning of the prefrontal cortex. Overexposure to technology, that is interfering with prefrontal cortex activity. Inhale through the nose. You see, every single one of those 1 trillion nerve cells has the energy cycle in it. And we looked at this week that when there's oxygen in the energy cycle, you're getting 18 times more energy. I noticed that when my children who are homeschooled, if they're struggling with long division, sentence patterning, you know what I do? Call a break. They go and jump on the trampoline, ride their bikes, run up and down the hill, come back 10 minutes later. Oh, what's gone into their brain? Oxygen. And then they'd often get it. And if you are studying, we should all be studying, Make sure you have lots of breaks. Make sure you go on the trampoline, the rebounder, on the exercise bike. Fresh air, lots of water. Inhale through the nose. Are you practicing? You will get more oxygen at the cellular level. More oxygen in the brain cell means that intellect, reason and judgment increase, which means that our ability to make decisions, proper decisions, increases. Nutrition. Our brain needs peak nutrition, high fibre. All those minerals and vitamins, those minerals are all necessary for the flash of the neurotransmitters from cell to cell. You see, our brain is an electrical system, and it needs nutrients for the proper functioning of this. Good amounts of fat. Remember that myelin sheath, it's a fatty sheath. Make sure you're having fat every meal. Have a look, you're having nuts, seeds, avocados, a little bit of olive oil. Open your baked potato, put olive oil on and Celtic salt. Makes it very, very nice. And protein. The neurotransmitters that flash from cell to cell are made out of amino acids. So our brain needs peak nutrition. Moderation in all the good things. Don't overdo the fats. No, I don't suggest a cup of olive oil a day. Don't have your largest meal at the end of the day. All the good things should be done in moderation. Exercise. When you exercise, you increase the circulation of the blood to the brain. When you exercise, you increase oxygen availability in each brain cell. Dr. Neil Nedley, in his book, Depression: A Way Out, when he gets a very depressed patient, bipolar schizophrenia, he puts them on 7 hours of exercise a day. That's a bit extreme, it's cheap medicine. He said after 1 week they are so improved they can go to a 1 hour a day maintenance dose or 15 minutes high intensity interval training a day. Cheap medicine. Dr. Neil Nedley, I went to a conference that he was holding in Sydney 15 years ago. He said that he noticed a lot of his patients were on antidepressants. It shocked him, it surprised him. So he decided to try lifestyle changes. What are the lifestyle changes? Sunshine, drinking more water, getting off the stimulants, going to bed early, nutritious diet, exercise every day. He decided to try lifestyle changes with them. And he looked at their lifestyle and he showed them how they could adjust, drink more water, start going to bed a bit early, try and do any technology they've got to do in the middle of the day, not in the evening. Have soft lamps at night to get the brain ready for sleep. He said if that could even equal the effect of medication, he'd be happy. And I'll never forget his next statement. He said it far exceeded. Lifestyle changes far exceeded the effect of medication on mental illness, on depression. I have to tell you that I used to work as a psychiatric nurse in my late teens, 20s. I didn't see people cured. I saw people managed. Sometimes good, sometimes not good. I saw the same people come back again and again and again. And what's the definition of insanity? To do what you've always done and expect different results. They used to drink a lot of sodas. They used to drink a lot of coffee. They used to smoke a lot. So when I'm sitting there, and this was probably 20 years later after I'd done psych nursing, and I'm hearing Neil Nedley say that changing lifestyle and dietary far exceeded the effect of medication, that statement set me on a pathway. Set me on a pathway where I knew, and the more I investigated, the more I saw it, that mental illness can be managed, controlled, and even turned around with lifestyle changes. I've met 5 people in my travels who've been diagnosed with schizophrenia, bipolar, and they're medication-free. And managing. Being bipolar, being on heavy medication is hard. Conquering it with lifestyle changes is hard. Choose your hard. So I have a friend in Fiji, and her son developed this after recreational drugs, and unfortunately that's giving it to a lot of young people. He's managing it today, and he's managing it very well. He goes to bed very early every night. He plays the guitar every evening. He gets up early, drinks a lot of water. He reads his Bible every day, and he works physically hard on their farm every day. I don't think he will ever marry. He will never be what he was going to be. He was one of the gifted boys in the class of doing engineering. He got a fellowship, scholarship to go over to Australia. Recreational drugs, they to this day don't quite know what he took, but it damaged his brain. But he's managing very well, considering the damage that was done. What will it take? I do not know. It depends how damaged the brain is. It depends how willing the person is to do what you've got to do. Because remember the old saying, a man convinced against his will be of the same opinion still. That's why if someone says to me, my son's got schizophrenia, he's 26, can he come to your retreat? You know what my next question is? Is he willing? Because if he is not willing, we can't work with that. Again, it's choose your hard. Yes, it is hard work, but oh, the results. How nice to be medication-free and to be managing well. But it is hard work. So you choose your hard. And with a lot of medication, it's buy now, pay later. Isn't that true? Yes, medication can play a role in a crisis, absolutely. I was so glad for the pain-killing medication when the orthopaedic surgeon pulled my broken out-of-place radius back into place. But that was one day. One day. But unfortunately, because it works in a crisis, it's sort of slipped over into everyday life. I knew that lifestyle changes and simple natural treatments can help conquer many things, but I didn't realise in the mental area. But I have seen it again and again. And one area, and I touched on it last night with depression, is a hormonal imbalance. So I have seen many young women conquer depression by forgiveness of their abuser of times past, of implementing the lifestyle changes I talked about this evening, by starting to apply the yam cream. And I have found in some cases within 6 months they're off their medication. Sometimes it takes a year. It depends how long they've been on the medication and depends how diligent they are of what you've got to do to conquer it. But if a young woman at the age of 28 is on antidepressant medication, what's the future like? It doesn't look good, does it? It's pretty hard. And I mentioned last night the article I read called The Depressing Effect of Antidepressants. They're not a cure. There's only one thing that has the ability to heal us, and that is the human body. And it makes the most sense to heal the human body, whether it be mental, emotional, or physical, but to work with the healing powers that God put in this body. When we work with those basic body functions that God put in there, I see again and again people begin to heal. People begin to manage and even begin to heal. Much depends on the age, how diligent the person is to do what you've got to do, and also how damaged the body is, how serious is the condition. But no matter what it is, I found that there's always response. I read this one about a year ago, The School That Escaped the Nazis. Very interesting book about this teacher in the early 1930s who had quite an unusual school. She taught the children a lot of music, gardening, so there's a lot of extracurricular activities. But she saw the writing on the wall, and so she took her school to England. And after that, she was instrumental in arranging trainloads of Jewish children out of Poland and out of Germany. And she also was instrumental with a whole team of people in arranging foster parenting for these children, because the parents saw what was about to happen. And she kept these children busy. These children have just lost their parents. They knew they might never see them again. She just kept them busy. Gardening, flower gardens. Isn't it wonderful that the Creator God gave us the ability to create music, musical instruments? They also built this beautiful amphitheatre in the garden and planted rose bushes and got the neighbours to come, and they would put on musical performance. They'd grow their vegetables and sell them to the neighbours. She kept them very busy. Then they had to move to North London because the war came and the bombing was happening in South London. And when they moved to this old house, the children helped to renovate the house. Kept them busy, busy, busy. And then the war was over and they were able to go back to their original house that the army had been in, and the army didn't look after it very well. So once again, the children made teams and they fixed the house and revived their gardens, kept up their music. Then she started getting children from Auschwitz. And a 12-year-old boy came, and she could see that this little boy had been through terrible times. And the little boy was told not to talk about it. And the little boy said, I don't want to talk about it because I relive the horrors. And what does psychiatry say to do today? You've got to talk about it. But what does the Bible say? Philippians 3:13, this one thing I can do, forgetting those things which are behind. I reach forth to the good things. I'm not interested in digging up graves. What's in them? Dead, rotten things. Let them lie. Every now and then the little boy would say something like, when they were lined up for lunch, the last time I lined up, every 10th person was shot. I was number 9. They just kept him busy, kept him busy. They got a few more children, same thing. Do you know those children healed? They healed. And they became prominent members of society. And they healed through creation. By creating music, by creating gardens, by creating vegetables, by renovating the house, she just kept them busy. One of the men went back to Germany and he became a speaker and a guide in the museum. And he had healed to the point where he could talk about what he'd been through because he'd been able to forgive. When you forgive, you cut the chains that bind you to that painful past. But if you continually relate the pain, you actually bind it to you. And it's a heavy load. It's a heavy load when we continue drag that painful past with us. Forgiveness cuts the chains that bind you to that painful past. And remember, when you forgive, you don't have to feel like it. How could you? The pain goes too deep. But every day, as you confirm your forgiveness, the pain gets less and less. And that's what they found in the school that escaped the Nazis. Beautiful story. And you know, as those children grew, and started to take prominent roles in society, every holidays they come back to the school. They come back because it had such warm memories for them. Things to think about, but again I love the way these stories, they illustrate the Bible principles. And remember, God said, I have come that they might have life, and then they might have life more abundantly. John 10:10. Life should be good. We're going to have a break now, and when we come back, we're going to look at how you can prevent Alzheimer's.